Joe Biden delivers full U.S. backing for Israel in person on a solidarity visit in which he blames Islamist militants for a deadly rocket strike on a Gaza hospital. The U.S. president also announced the resumption of urgent aid to the besieged Palestinian enclave. And on an Israel visit, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak aims to ensure de-escalation. As per the Palestinian Health Ministry, 471 people were killed in the hospital strike. Israel denied responsibility, saying an initial investigation showed the strike was caused by a malfunctioning rocket fired by the Palestinian militant group Islamic Jihad. Like Hamas, Islamic Jihad is proscribed as a terrorist group by the United States and other Western governments. Arab countries have almost universally blamed Israel for the hospital strike. They include Egypt, Jordan and UAE among the region's few nations that have diplomatic ties with Israel. Iran President Ebrahim Raisi predicted the end of Israel following deadly Gaza hospital explosion. Apart from funding Hamas, Israel's arch foe backs Hezbollah. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a 57-member bloc of Muslim-majority countries, denounced Israel's backers for granting the country impunity in its war. Continuing the conveyor of Western leaders who have visited Israel in the wake of Hamas attacks, the British Prime Minister is in Israel to seek de-escalation of the conflict. Rishi Sunak will then travel to West Asian capitals as part of his diplomatic efforts. US President Joe Biden is also eyeing unprecedented aid for Israel and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank as part of a wider $100 billion package that includes support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping told Egypt's Prime Minister that Beijing hoped to work with Cairo to bring more stability to West Asia.
Speaker, the families of some of the missing are in the public gallery today.
Now for more on the situation on ground, WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal met up with our Israel correspondent Jody Cohen in Tel Aviv, who's been reporting the conflict on ground since day one. Take a look.
WION team is on the ground. We know that it has been over 1 week since the attacks happened, the terror attacks happened in southern Israel, which were perpetrated by Hamas. And WION team has traveled to southern part of the country where we have seen the troop build-up, tanks also rolling towards southern part of the country. And there is a lot of concern here in the country, especially regarding hostages. With me is Jody Cohen. Jody, you have been here, you live here. How do you see the situation panning out? Almost as a ritual, we see every evening here in Tel Aviv, the sirens going on and rockets being fired. How do you see the situation panning out in terms of the concerns over the rocket attacks and maybe perhaps about the hostages as well, because we both have spoken to many of the family members of the hostages?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the very beginning, I think there was a feeling of shock across the country. There had been reports that for a while now that the government didn't feel that Hamas wanted an escalation. So 6:30 that Saturday morning when the sirens went off, there was an immediate feeling, I think, from a lot of people like, was this a mistake? What's going on? But very quickly heard the situation. It came out over time that thousands of Hamas terrorists had infiltrated into Israel. We've heard that now up to 1,400 people, civilians, have been killed in Israel, and most of them in the south, in horrific stories that we've been hearing. We've been speaking to people on the grounds there. There are 200 hostages, perhaps more. We know that most of those are Israeli, but a number come from up to 40 different countries around the world. So a lot of communities affected by this. In terms of the rockets, they can come at any moment. We've had rocket sirens in the morning, afternoon, evening, the middle of the night. In the south, in the center of the country, in the north, we know that there are rockets coming from Hamas in Gaza, but also there's action on the border coming from Lebanon into northern Israel. The Israel Defense Forces have actually evacuated Israeli communities in the north and in the south and got people to go to the center of the country, much like they've advised people in northern Gaza to go to southern Gaza for their safety. In terms of how this could escalate, 200 hostages are being held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. There is expected to be a ground invasion in order to try and get those hostages back. We know that President Biden visited, Rishi Sunak from the UK is visiting.
I was coming to that point. The visit of the Western leaders, we saw the US President visiting. Before that, the German Chancellor was here. The European leaders have visited. The visit of the Western leaders is seen as a solidarity visit, a visit to showcase that how they are supporting the people of Israel, while at a time when we know that there's a lot of domestic pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu as well, because if he doesn't acts or he's not seen acting against Hamas, then that could be seen as a political suicide for him as well. So essentially, how do you see the visit of these Western leaders helping Prime Minister Netanyahu at a time when it's a make or break moment for his political career as well?
I think nobody in the country right now is thinking about political careers. I think the country is thinking about the fate of those 200 hostages and also about defending the borders to stop more Hamas infiltrations. We've heard reports of perhaps dozens of Hamas terrorists still within Israel. So the priority right now across the country is making sure that any infiltrators are caught, making sure that the borders are defended in the north and the south, and on getting those hostages back. I think the visits, the solidarity is very much welcome in Israel, but I think those visits are just as much about finding out what is going on, because those countries also have hostages being held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. They also have had citizens killed, so there's a lot of communities around the world affected by this. So I think on the one hand it's solidarity, on the other hand it's also wanting to make sure that aid can get to the civilians in Gaza in the south.